Welcome back everyone. For today's video, we are once again going to be continuing with our educational speedrun series. Now we've done a lot of videos thus far, we're slowly climbing through the ranks, and let's see what we can learn today together.
Zooming through the game with the bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Night on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey hey, he's smurfing play by play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat. Just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with our first game. We're going to hit the start button and play a rapid game of chess. So my opponent opens with the move d4. Now there are many different options in terms of openings that I can start with. I like to keep it pretty simple. I think at the beginner level against moves like d4, it's better to play for moves like play openings like d5 and e6 or Queen's Gambit accepted, something that's more along the basic principles. So I'm going to play the move e6. Now the purpose here is to open up the diagonal for this dark square bishop. My opponent plays knight c3, and now there are a couple of options. At the top level, most people will play the move bishop to e7 here, primarily because after knight to f6, white can trade the pawns on d5, and we reach what's known as the exchange Queen's Gambit decline. However, at the beginner level, I do not believe that openings are super important beyond the fact that you simply know how to develop the pieces. You're not going to get blown off the board and lose a game at a 700 or 800 level, or even maybe 1500 if you play a line that at the top level is considered a little bit dubious. So I'm going to play knight to f6. Now the reason I'm going to play this is some symmetry, playing the same general setup here with d5, e6, and knight f6 regardless of what white does. My opponent plays a3, now we go bishop e7. Now of course my opponent could trade the pawns on d5, but it wouldn't change anything. I still would develop the bishop normally. So we get h3 now. My opponent's playing a little bit weird here. He's pushing these pawns to h3 and a3. One of the things that I stress with the opening phase at the beginner level is the development. You want to have a straightforward path to development. If you can play the first 5-6 moves and they're always going to be the same no matter what, you are off to a good start. So let's castle. My opponent plays e3, and now that I've finished development, I want to figure out what to do with the queen side. Now, one of the reasons I like the Queen's Gambit decline is you'll notice here I developed this knight here, I developed the bishop, and I castle the king. So now I've finished all the development on the king side of the board, which is to the left of the king, white and black. This is considered the king side, and of course this is considered the queen side. So queen side being the pieces to the left of the queen here, as you see, and of course king side being these pieces to the left of the king. So I've developed the knight, developed bishop, castle, the king. So now we want to look to the queen side and how to develop. Now in the Queen's Gambit decline, more often than not, you want to play for either this move c5 to try and challenge the white center, or to play a move like b6 to fianchetto the bishop. Now I'm going to play the move b6 here to fianchetto the bishop. This knight in general, I will point out in the Queen's Gambit decline, if you play c5, you do generally follow up with knight c6, whereas when I play b6 and bishop b7, usually the knight's going to go to d7. So if I fianchetto the bishop, the knight goes here. If I play for the move c5, the knight goes here. So it's just a matter of which setup you play for in terms of where this knight on b8 belongs. Okay, so we got bishop e2. Now I'm going to play the move bishop to b7 here. I will also state, I apologize those of you guys who are watching this video, if the sound is off or you hear more clicks, I am on the road, as I've pointed out a few times already, but I hope you guys enjoy it nonetheless. So we got knight f3. Now, as I said, in this position, where does this knight belong? This knight belongs on the d7 square. So my opponent takes the pawn, and now I have two options. I can take with the pawn, or I can take with the knight. Generally, you don't want to take with the bishop. When you fianchetto the bishop, any move that you play with this bishop where it can be captured, even in an equal trade, is generally not what you want. So that's a theme that's important actually across all levels. If you have a situation where there's a trade where you can take something with a fianchettoed bishop where it will be traded in an even exchange, you generally don't want to do that. So the move I'm going to play is I'm going to take with the knight. Now the reason I'm going to take with the knight is that if I were to take with the pawn, this bishop diagonal would be very blocked, but when I take with the knight, I can take back with the bishop next turn because there will be no way for white to capture the fianchettoed bishop. But more importantly, I can play for c5, and now I'm going to get two open diagonals for the b's. Now my opponent plays king f1. This is very clearly a mouse slip. He meant to castle. Nonetheless, we're going to follow with our basic strategy. Play c5. Open up the diagonals, prepare rook c8 to use this open file for the rook. Very, very free-flowing and smooth play. He goes knight d2. Okay, now at this point, we're obviously well ahead because my opponent has played king f1 versus actually castling like he intended to. We've mostly finished our development here. Now you see I've developed this knight, this bishop. Last piece that's not developed is the rook, so I'm going to put it on this open file, or this file that will open in a second here. Generally, rooks are very well placed on open files, and now I've achieved optimal development. I've finished my development completely here. I will take to open up the file. And now we start to look for more of the advancing. So we look for basic tactics. Is everything guarded? Is everything undefended? Now, when we look at this position, you'll notice here that with the rook and the knight, this knight can be captured. Now, when I look at this, if I take the knight, he takes back, I can recapture, and that will be a trade of knights, but I will have won an extra pawn. So, of course, I want to do that. Now, after this game ends, I will point out something for those of you guys who are watching, because some of the themes that I've mentioned here, it probably seems a little bit too simple, but these themes that exist in the Queen's Gambit client generally are themes that you will be able to replicate over and over and over again in your games. So we got bishop d2. I'm just going to drop the juicer back to c8 here. I still have the rook on the open file, and I am up one pawn in the center. I've got 6 pawns. My opponent has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My opponent's deep in the tank. Now, the problem for my opponent here is that he has a king and a rook that are not developed. He also has a rook on the A file that's not well placed. For me, you'll notice that I'm up a pawn, but I have 2 bishops on great diagonals here. I've got a great rook on this file as well. Okay, so we get the move bishop g4. Now, after bishop g4 is played, I'm just looking at this position optically, and queen c7 is a logical move to try and play for the file, but the move I'm going to go for is knight to f6. Now, the reason I'm going to play this move knight to f6 is I want to attack the bishop on g4. And I also want to prepare maybe a queen d5 maneuver to hit the knight and the pawn at the same time. But generally speaking here, it's just about optimal piece placement. Okay, so we get the move bishop to e2. Now here, I'm going to play the move queen d5. The reason I'm going to play this, I want to line up the AA battery, hit the pawn on g2 here. Maybe bring my other rook to the central file as well. You'll notice the rooks here could be very effective on these two semi-open files. The C file actually is completely open. This D file is semi-open because there's a pawn on D4, but you do have multiple squares on the file. Now my opponent finds bishop F3. Excellent move to stop me from taking the pawn. The move I'm going to play here is queen B5, tickling the king on G1. I have to be careful here because if I were to move the queen to say d6, I would lose the bishop. So queen d5, maybe not the greatest move at the beginner level to play. I'm going to be able to get away with it because I had this check, and now I'm going to trade, of course, because again, as you will notice here, I'm ahead by 1 pawn. Now my opponent takes with this pawn. That is a really ugly move. White ruins the pawn structure here, and now the main thing to think about is anything hanging? No, the pawn is guarded. There's no check on g5, so nothing is really hanging. So now I want to think about this. Let's look at white's position. The king, the rook, and the rook are not developed here. So they're not developed, but I don't have an immediate attack. So what I want to do is look for targets, things that I can go after. Now what I'm going to play here is I'm going to play this move rook c4. Now rook d8 would be completely fine as well. The reason I'm going to play rook c4 here is not only do I potentially target the pawn on d4, but I can now set up the 2 towers on this open file with rook to c8, get a double stack, and try to put even more pressure on my opponent's position. Okay, he plays a4. I could obviously take this pawn. I'm going to play queen d5 and play for a bit more of the themes here with queen d5. I'm going to go rook c8, try to play rook c2, try to attack on this open file. The rooks are going to be very good on the open line. The queen is very good hitting these pawns. Everything is looking very, very Gucci. Okay, so my opponent plays bishop e3. I'm going to play rook c8, following through with my thematic plan. Bishop e3, a pretty solid move here to guard the pawn. Now, white's not doing terribly. White is only down a pawn. The real issue here is the king side. This king, this rook, and these weak pawns around the king are the big problem. My opponent goes rook c1. I'm up a pawn. I'm happy to trade. And now it's time to try and figure out how to attack. You'll notice that this king and the rook still are not in the game. I'm going to go queen f5. And the reason I'm going to play this move is I create a square for the horse to start jumping every which way from d5, but also I can play queen g6 and start checking the king. So I put this queen where I can check the king. I create a bunch of squares for the horse here, and everything is looking very, very good. I also have rook c2 as well to create the classic 90-degree right triangle. This is just a very, very pleasant position for me. So we get knight e2. Move I'm going to play here, I'm just going to go knight to d5 here. Queen g6, of course, completely fine as well. I'm going to drop back. I don't want to hang my queen. And now I pressure the knight. I'm pressuring the bishop. King and rook are really out of the game. And, of course, I have rook c2 as well to hit the second rank. So my opponent plays f4. Now as we look at this, there is something hanging. This pawn is guarding both the knight and the bishop. So if I take, he takes, I take. This pawn, something's going to have to yield. This is a blunder of a piece. Wouldn't really change the outcome of the game, but this does lose right away. Now another important point that I want to make about the beginner level is for a lot of people who think that openings or these sorts of attacks are really important, probably the single biggest thing is not making big blunders. If you can avoid hanging pawns, hanging knights or bishops, that'll get you very far just to begin with, because if you look at this game, I haven't really done anything super special. Now I have played some nuanced moves here in the late middle game phase, but mostly the main thing I've done is I've avoided hanging any material. Now I'm going to take the idea is to play rook c1 to win the queen. I also have bishop to h4 to set up the checkmate on f2. Okay, my opponent plays queen e2. Now here I can simply go check. Something's got to give here because the king's under attack. Okay, we'll take. I'll go check, and this will be checkmate. I'm going to pre-move this. Basically, if king g2, I go check, king f1, queen f2. That's just checkmate, GG. Why not? Now we're going to go to the go back through the game just for a second, because I do want to point out a couple of important things. Now when I talk about the queen's gambit decline, one of the things is no matter which setup white does, let's just say knight f3, you always play knight f6, bishop e7, and castles. This is your standard starter setup no matter what. You finish your development on the king side, develop the knight, develop the bishop, castle the king, pretty much no matter what. Now, the reason that I said that at the top of people play bishop e7 is because after white plays this move pawn takes pawn here, black generally does not take with the knight, because after e4 takes, there's a bit of a big white center here, which is very hard to deal with. And additionally, you end up in a structure where the pawns are on squares that you're not going to normally see in a queen's gambit decline. So that's why if this order is played, you're supposed to take, but it's still much of the same. After bishop g5, you go bishop to e7, and then you castle the king. The one important point that I will make here is that in these positions, you can play b6 and fianchetto the bishop here. There's nothing wrong with it, but more often than not, black is going to play c6, and we end up in what is known as the Carlsbad structure. White has these three pawns versus these three pawns. This structure can occur out of a plethora of openings. You can get this out of almost any opening. You can get this out of the you can get the reverse version of this out of the London system, where black has these three versus white having these three. You can get it out of the Caro-Kann opening as well, with this as well. Same kind of thing where you get this structure, same set of pawns versus these pawns. It is the most common pawn structure in the game of chess. Now, the reason I mentioned this is that in this Carlsbad structure, this is not the line I was looking for. In this Carlsbad structure, you generally are going to be looking to put your knight on d7, play something like knight d7, and then knight to f8. This is a little bit more of a foreign concept versus what just happened in this game. So you do need to be aware of this pawn structure, but when white doesn't do that, when we get this position here, if white takes on d5, I could take with the pawn. This is perfectly reasonable to play for something like c5 with knight c6 here, but in general at a beginner level, I think it's very hard to play with the bishops. So in this game, when I had this opportunity to keep this diagonal open here, for example, this open bishop, this wooden shield, and then play for c5, it's much easier, I think, to play when bishops have open diagonals versus closed diagonals. Now, if you really like this idea of having the open bishop, another opening that I could recommend for people who are watching this video is that you play something like the Queen's Indian defense with its move b6 followed by bishop b7 and d5. You get very, very similar play with d5 and knight d7, knight d5 and c5. So if you're really dead set on getting this sort of structure, I would actually recommend studying this Queen's Indian system. But I think at the beginner level, it's much easier to keep it simple and just play the standard Queen's Gambit decline setup. So, all right, let's go for our next one. Here we go. We have the white pieces, and I'm going to play the move e4. We get to move d5. Now, we've had a lot of Scandinavian center counter openings. I don't really believe in this opening at the beginner level. See, many people, I think in at least 4 or 5 of the games in the speedrun series we've now had, someone's played queen e5 versus the standard queen a5, d6, or d8, and this is once again just a terrible move. It's terrible because I'm going to get a lot of tempos where the queen is going to have to start scurrying, and I'm going to finish my development very, very quickly here. You see, when I play this move, the queen has to waste time. The queen has played 1, 2, has gone 1, 2, 3. And I'm able to get 1, 2. So I'm way ahead in development here relative to my opponent. So what I want to do is try to attack very quickly. Now, this is just a bad move. That's a free pawn. I'll take it gladly. Let's go here. I'm going to go for the quick punish because I really think that if people play this Scandinavian, now I go d4, bishop guards the knight, the pawn guards the knight, and attacks the queen, something really, 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 really bad is about to happen. So we get queen d6. Now I'm going to play the move a4 here. Okay, we get bishop a6. Let's just go bishop to f4 again. Maybe try to pressure the pawn. I've got great development. Black is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces undeveloped here. This is simply an unmitigated disaster. This is why if you're going to play Scandinavian from the black side, you have to know your next queen move. You cannot just play this d5 move without knowing anything. Now I'm going to go queen f3, a really brutal move, lining up even more pressure on this diagonal. Black is in all kinds of trouble. Additionally, there might be a checkmate threat on f7 as well. That's actually a very good move. It guards the pawn here, and it's kind of a little bit of development as well. Now, at the beginner level, this move is probably not most natural, but it's a move that ends the game effectively. When your opponent puts pawns on these two squares, you should always be aware if there is a way to attack a piece where you can jump towards this very critical d6 square. Whether it's c4 or whether it's e4, you should always be aware of this jump towards this very important square when your opponent puts these pawns on these two squares in the opening. Now, most of the time, you're not going to have an opportunity like what I'm going to play here, but there are situations where if your opponent does push these pawns and puts knight on e7, if the square is uncovered, there are tactics to attack a queen or another piece via these two squares and then put the knight here and end the game. Now, the move I'm going to play is knight c4. Bishop covers a square, knight's going here while attacking the queen, and this king is going to get attacked very, very soon, and the game will end very promptly. Let's go check, attack the king. I'm going to take this pawn next move. It's not the absolute best move, but for the beginner purposes, it is a move that I would expect a beginner to play as opposed to a deeper and more nuanced move like rook a d1. So I'm simply going to take the pawn, forking the king and the rook. Okay, and now I'm going to play rook d1. Now this move, of course, a beginner is going to play knight takes rook, but I'm going to play rook d1 because I am noticing that this queen is pinned. Now this is coming back to basic tactics and puzzles that people should try to do fairly consistently, because you are going to see puzzles like this, and the more of these puzzles you see, the easier it will be to recognize these patterns. Now, I don't know if I have a checkmate here. I'm going to try to hunt the king right away. I do not actually see a forced checkmate after king b7. Maybe there is there a tactic? Okay, let's go queen b3. I'm just trying to hunt the king immediately. Again, my opponent has all these pieces that are not in the game. I'm not really worried about anything bad happening. Let's just go, I guess, bishop anywhere, check the king, and then bishop e3 will be checkmate. This game's a bit of a dud, a little bit too simplistic, but I will say this is why the Scandinavian is a very dangerous opening to play. If you don't know exactly what you're doing, already on move number 3, my opponent made a huge mistake with this queen e5 move. I just take, that's checkmate. Not a whole lot really to talk about with this game, as I just pointed out. Probably in at least 4 of the games in the speedrun series so far, my opponent has played queen e5. Just a bad move, because we have this term in chess called tempo. And tempo is a situation where I develop the knight, but I attack the queen. So normally when you bring out a knight, my opponent would want to bring out his knight, so that on castles he can sort of mirror the development and match me or keep the same pace. But the problem here is you can't keep the same pace, because while I'm developing and castling, you have to waste time moving the queen. And now you can bring the knight out, but you'll notice that I got 1-2, whereas you basically had to retreat the queen once and then play knight f6. So it's like 2 for 1, so you're not matching the pace of the development. So let's do one more game for the road. This time we're going to have black, and let's see how the game goes. Okay, we get e4. Now this time I'm going to play the Scandinavian myself, because I want to sort of show you guys how you should play it. I think I've played a few times already, but after that last game, which really leaves a bad taste in my mouth, I need to show you guys the proper defense. So we get knight c3. Now see, my opponent moves the knight, attacks the queen. I'm going to move the queen here, and the idea is to play c6 next turn. The queen is a little bit wayward, but the point is when I play c6 here, I potentially take some squares away from the knight on d5 and b5, but much more importantly, I create escape squares for my queen to retreat to from this a5 position. So let's develop the knight. Now I start to focus on the development, but as long as I keep these squares open for the queen, I'm not super concerned. Now I'll go here. Also important to note, c6 stops white from pushing this pawn to d5 as well, as I cover the square 3 times. Let's just go here. I'm going to play e6, very similar to Hikaru Khan here. My opponent probably will take. Okay, let's go e6 here. Now, as I pointed out in the previous game, you'll notice I have put these pawns on c6 and e6 squares here, but you'll notice that this d6 square, there's always a bishop spying. So, like, if this knight were on e7 already here, white would have ideas like knight e4, knight d6, or knight c4, knight d6, but because this knight is not here and the bishop covers the square, none of these square ideas really exist. So I'm going to develop the knight. So, for example, say white plays knight c4 and I drop the queen back, the bishop covers the d6 square. We got to move castles. Now here I'm going to play bishop b4, trying to pin the knight here. Very, very dangerous threats. My opponent goes a3. Now the question here is, do I want to get a little bit cheesy or not? I could go bishop takes a3. I think at the beginner level, sacrifices are probably not what you want to be aiming towards, so I'm just going to keep the material balanced here. This game's going to be probably a pretty slow end game where I look to trade down the material. Let's trade down. And let's go knight d5. Now here, the material is balanced. White has the 2 bishops, but white does have a slightly compromised pawn structure in this situation. So I should be a little bit better, but it's not anything super special. Okay, we got bishop d2. I did realize that this is going to be a tough one to really illustrate at the beginner level because the themes here are going to be pretty advanced. It's an endgame. I'm going to play knight d6. Now, the thing is, I don't want to trade the bishops. I don't want to trade these bishops because white has 2 pawns that are stacked on top of each other. You don't want to undouble them. So I'm going to try to force white to trade so that I have squares for the knight on c4 very specifically, which I can take advantage of the weaknesses. Now, my opponent plays rook f1. One thing I said at the start of this video, if you can avoid making blunders, that will already take you very far. And you'll notice, again, my opponent has done relatively well. I haven't hung anything, he hasn't, but now he makes a big mistake because when you look at this bishop, there's only a pawn guarding it. I have 1-2 attacking it. I'm going to be ahead by a pawn. And more importantly, now I'm going to get a great square for my knight to start jumping. This square is really, really useful, and I'm going to get the double stack on the file, and this is just simply very, very good for me. Okay, we get rook f3. I'm going to trade the rooks. I don't have to, but I further ruin the white pawn structure here. I'm going to play the move rook to d8. White has double pawns here. There's a square for the knight. White is also down a pawn here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm up a pawn here. All roads lead to Rome. Of course, I'm happy to trade since I have an extra pawn. Let's go knight c4. Now, if white were to take, I think I can play b6 and king b7 to trap the bishop. This is a very famous trap that was really brought to prominence during the famous Boris Spassky Bobby Fischer World Championship match. You take a pawn on the corner with a bishop, and then your bishop ends up getting trapped. Uh-oh. That's a mistake. That's a big mistake, actually. This might be a new account. Let's go knight c4. Let's play b5, a5 here. Create some passed pawns on the queen side. End the game as quickly as possible. Let's take. Now we just start running the p up the board. 1, 2, 3, 4. Start pushing the p. He's going to go back to try and stop the pawn. I'm just going to play g6. Not necessary, but I want to stop any pawn pushes here on the other side of the board. I'm just going to freeze this whole side of the board. Basically, it's like freezing everything on this side, and then we just focus everything on the queen side. We just tunnel on this part of the board, and we bring the king up, and we win the game over here. We just want to make sure there are no tricks here on this side, and white can really only push his pawn, which will just simply be captured. So now I'm going to run my king up, push the pawn, and the rest should be really, really simple. In fact, I'm going to actually start pre-moving, I guess. Didn't need to pre-move, but I did. Probably my opponent will take one of these pawns. I will just recapture. Gonna bring my king up. Same thing exists here too, by the way. If f5, I just take with the g pawn. In fact, I'm just gonna pre-move it. Now white has no pawns. The whole king side is frozen, and now I'm just gonna focus on this other side of the board completely. It's not as necessary to do this, but sometimes if you can freeze part of the board, that is a good thing. Now, my opponent resigns the game here. What I want to point out about this one, again, is c6. When you play the move c6, one of the main themes in the Scandinavian is white wants to play something like bishop d2 here, and then something like knight e4, and right away your queen on a5 is under attack. So that's why c6 is so effective, because, for example, say you play a move like knight f6, d4, knight 6, bishop d2. Already here, after a move like e6 in this position, you have to be very careful of a knight b5 move, as you don't have the retreating squares here. It's one of a couple options that exist. So when I play this move c6, if white puts a bishop on d2 or a queen on d2 to spy the queen, I always keep the 2 retreating squares available. Additionally here, if white could play something like bishop c4, instead I go h6 and white gets d5, white would be doing very well in this position as well. But that's why, if we go back to the game, here, if white were to play bishop c4 now, you're going to play e6, stopping white from playing this d5 pawn thrust, as you have 4 pieces covering the critical square. So we went here. This also, by the way, very, very similar to the Caro-Kann system, just to illustrate it, where in the Caro-Kann there's systems like e4, c6, Something like this, for example, where again you try to bring the bishop out. There are also systems like what was the system I was thinking of? Something like this with takes here, knight g3, bishop g6, and e6. Again, same structure. You got these two pawns. You have the bishop outside. It's very, very similar. So that's why if you play one of these opening Scandinavian or Karokani, you want to experiment, I probably would recommend adding the other one to your repertoire. So if we go forward, we get this position. Yeah, the one other point I want to make, say white goes knight c4 and queen d8, the bishop always is covering this d6 square. As I was starting to point out before, if I just set this up, say I go knight g8, just some random moves, and white gets knight c4, suddenly there's this big threat on d6, like in the previous game I played, where you attack the queen, you have knight d6, there are all kinds of bad things happening here. White's going to get knight d6, and black is going to get absolutely blown away. So, those are probably pretty much the main themes of this game. Not a whole lot else to add. I guess the one last point I want to make about this endgame is here, for example, if I were to trade, now white can start pushing the pawns, creating squares for the bishop here. And these pawns are much better like this than they are right here, for example, where after takes, these pawns are immobilized. They cannot really move the board. If you go here, I just take. You could play bishop e3, but same problem. These pawns are never moving anywhere. They don't get to help take squares away from the pony. So hopefully I explained that last bit reasonably well. That's pretty much it for this last game, and that's going to do it for this video. So I do hope you guys have enjoyed this video from our educational speedrun series. If you are not subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back with some more great content, recap, speedrun videos, everything else in the very, very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.